Hello people of the internet, welcome to Paint to Life episode 30. On this episode we're going to be covering an ogre, what they are, what they're capable of, what you can expect from them as a player, and how to use them as a DM. And of course, since it's a Halloween themed episode, it's not just going to be any ogre, it's going to be an undead ogre, aka Ogre Zombie. Now while I paint this to life in true D&D fashion, I'm going to tell you the story of Gul-Kot, an above-average, smart ogre, and his war band rampaging across the territory trying to make a name for themselves. Enter the Cartwright family, and an encounter which will empower Gul-Kot to rise in power and become the king he was truly destined to be. I'm GM Atank. Let's get painting. Alright, now if you missed last week's episode with the Redwald family and their fateful camping experience with a roper, you can check that out right there if your browser supports it. So what is an ogre exactly? Ogres are very lazy and brutish, standing about 9 to 10 feet tall and weighing almost as much as me at about 600 pounds. An offshoot of their older cousins, the giants, ogres plague the land with their violence, ambush tactics, and overwhelming numbers. Gluttonous creatures willing to eat almost anything. And would sometimes use the skin and bones of their prey to fashion crude necklaces and loincloths. Now as players, remember ogres are as dumb as posts, but they're always evil. So use that to your advantage when planning on attacking, defending against them, or even escaping from them. Now for my fellow dungeon masters, know that a challenge rating of 2, an ogre is a great big bad end guy for a low level party, or if your players are getting a little too confident and cocky, throw them out as muscle if they think they got the encounter in the bag. Finally, I find role-playing ogres is quite an enjoyable experience. What they said. But what about our ogre? What of the great Gul-Kot? Many ogres across the plains of the Silver Marches were becoming a plague to the dwarves of Citadel Felbar. Many caravans had been ambushed and ransacked by an overwhelming force of ogres. Now, Citadel Felbar had roads leading to and from it underground, but the Underdark had been a little too dangerous lately, so they were sticking to the above-ground routes, especially in the summer when the winter wasn't the problem. Now, rumors were that these ogres were led by another intelligent creature, possibly even an intelligent ogre. They say he was fond of torturing his captives to obtain information about future targets or rescue parties that might come looking for them. No man, woman, or child were safe to his ferocity. Now these rumors, they were true. Gul-Kot was an intelligent ogre, and he was leading his people to mountains of dwarf flesh and tons of caravan riches that they could use to please their gods. And his followers were growing, and his influence was growing. He was at the height of his power. In the ruins of one such caravan ambush were left an old man and his young granddaughter from the Cartwright family of Silverymoon. The young woman begged Gul-Kot not to kill her grandfather. She pledged her services to him and support of his army if he promised to not hurt him, to which the big ogre agreed and said he wouldn't. Gul-Kot then picks the old man up and using his immense strength throws him at least 15 feet in the air, where he turns over and lands on his head with a sickening crunch. He then turns, looks back at the girl and says, "I didn't kill him, the fall did," and begins to laugh. She looks at him with dead eyes and says, "Oh great and mighty Gul-Kot, I wish you the greatest fortune so that you may reign forever. It is what you deserve, no less." He then delivered a swift kick to the woman in her ribs, knocking her to the ground as he laughed, turned, and left her behind in anguish.
Forever king. I like the sound of that.
Now just a week later, while on a raid, Gul-Kot opens the top of a caravan to find a guard there with a crossbow fired right into his heart. Gul-Kot's eyes rolled back. He collapses into the ground. His blood fills his abdomen. He can feel it gurgling in his lungs. He closes his eyes and death takes him. Except death does not take Gul-Kot. He sits up astonished, pulls the bolt from the hole in his chest. The poor guard frantically trying to reload, he picks up casually and rips him into 2 pieces, throwing his body outside, and turns, and many of his ogres are looking at him astonished that he survived such a mortal wound. Some even begin to revere him. Now this was just the beginning, because over the coming battles, no sword, nor spear, nor club could hurt him. Injuries that he sustained, cuts, bruises, were all superficial, painless, and left no negative debilitations. Word of his victory spread. He gained more and more followers, and he set his sights on Citadel Felbar. He would attack, drive the dwarves out, and make it the seat of power for his new kingdom. However, a week later, despite having hundreds of powerful troops at his disposal, he looks at a reflection of himself in a pool. The hole in his chest from that original bolt, it's still there. It's black around the edges. A tawny pus continually leaks from it. His bruises are deep and purple. His many cuts and scrapes are bandaged, but they're not healing. Now, many of the females who used to lay with him, well, they're not around anymore as he stinks of foul rot, and no amount of washing can get him clean. Days later, during the initial attack on Citadel Felbar, King Gul-Kot is leading the charge. He's wading through the dwarven defenders, picking them up and breaking them into pieces, when suddenly a dwarven ballista hits him square in the abdomen, knocking him to the ground. When he stands up, he removes the giant ballista bolt, pulling some entrails out with it, leaving a gaping hole in his abdomen. In shock, Gul-Kot orders a regrouping, and his ogres return to their camp. Once there, no amount of healing bombs, bandages, potions seem to help, and now, walking, he limps due to his massive hole in his torso, causing his entire abdomen to kind of shift around as he walks. He's looking quite less like the fighter of old, but his ferocity remains, and so does his intelligence. He leads a group of 4 of his best fighting generals back to the location where he murdered the grandfather of that young woman. He senses she has something to do with this. When they find her, she's protected by 2 young sorceresses who instantly begin lobbing fire and lightning at the advancing ogres. Gul-Kot survives the onslaught, of course, but his entourage is badly wounded. He grabs one of his female spellcasters and begins to crush her in his massive hands, and as a reaction, he hears a powerful spell escape her lips as she dies. His hellish rebuke explodes in the king's face, removing his eye, nose, ear, and most of the scalp from his skull. There's this high-pitched ringing, all he can hear in his ear as he surveys the carnage, albeit now with just one cloudy eye. His surviving generals flee at the sight of this malformed Gul-Kot, and he roars in anger.
What did you do to me, woman? End this foul magic now, or by Vabrak the Destroyer, I will end you and anyone you have ever known.
Now, Gul-Kot, I cannot undo the magic that is fate. For you are truly the forever king. May your reign be long and deserving. She laughs as she disappears. Gul-Kot hobbles back to camp and realizes in his absence that the dwarves had counterattacked and killed many ogres and driven most of the rest back into the hills. He orders all that remained to accompany him, but they were revolted by the sight of their once proud king. His entrails dragging behind him like deflated balloons on large, meaty strings. His bruises and wounds festering with insects. His exposed skull shines in the summer sun. The stench rising from his viscera-soaked fur loincloth was so revolting it could be smelt from 30 yards away, but Gul-Kot couldn't tell as his nose and sinuses had been blown off. Defeated, he sunk to the ground, holding his head in his hands. Not long after, he was alone. Gul-Kot began to walk up into the mountains for days, without rest, without food, all alone with the exception of some carrion birds who would land on his shoulder to pick some of the botfly larvae wriggling around in his open, festering wounds. Once high enough into the snow-packed peaks, he began banging his club around looking for something which once lived here. It didn't take him long to find it. A remorhaz bursts from the snow nearby, a huge blue-white centipede with an intensely hot center body. It crawls towards that which disturbed its slumber. Gul-Kot drops his club and says,
Come, get your fill, filthy vermin.
The remorhaz entangles him with its many legs and begins to shove the forever king down into its gullet, where he is digested and destroyed. The remorhaz has been burrowing for a while through the snowy mountain pass, but suddenly it has an urge to stop. It rears its hind legs up where its chitin-plated thorax opens up and ropes of poop are deposited all alongside the mountain, seriously lowering the property value of the place. The satisfied creature scrapes its hind legs, it begins burrowing away, and shortly after, everything is quiet again. From that pile of dung, so ever slightly a movement, a bone twitches here, a tooth twitches there, and a small gray eye rolls ever so slightly forward, looking out across the mountain in a state of conscious terror. Long live Gul-Kot! Long live the Forever King! Alright, here's my finished zombie ogre, Gul-Kot. I used a Dremel to do the skull work where I took out his eye and scalped him to expose his skull. I also hollowed out his abdomen and used hot glue to make these intestines kind of gross and zombie looking. Living zombie. Gul-Kot for the shelf. What a story, what a fate, worse than death. I hope you liked it. If you want to watch the painting video where I go over what I did in that for yourself, that's going to be released on Tuesday, so make sure you check it out. Head on down to your friendly local gaming store, grab some paint, grab some minis, and get painting with us. Make sure you tell them GM Atank sent you, and after they look at you like you're on drugs, tell them about me and my channel so we can spread the channel and the love. If you like my storytelling, as always, guys, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Otherwise, I'm GM Atank. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you next week. Wash your hands, people.